My name is Sarah Chen, I'm 28, and 3 months ago my helicopter landed in my family's backyard during what they thought was a private meeting about cutting me out of our inheritance. For years, they called me the family failure, the broke disappointment who couldn't afford designer clothes or luxury vacations. They had no idea I was secretly worth $47 million. What happened next completely destroyed their perception of me forever, and the family dynamics will never be the same again. What do you think happened when they realized the truth about my wealth? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family revenge stories. You won't believe how this all started and the lengths I went to for the perfect payback. Growing up in the Chen family meant living under a microscope of financial judgment. My parents, David and Margaret Chen, built their wealth through real estate investments in the 1990s, turning a modest inheritance into a multi-million-dollar empire. My older brother Marcus followed the traditional path: Harvard MBA, investment banking, flashy lifestyle that screamed success. My younger sister Emma became a successful corporate lawyer, complete with the Mercedes and Manhattan penthouse. Then there was me, Sarah, the black sheep who chose computer science over business, who preferred hoodies to designer suits, and who lived in a modest apartment instead of showcasing wealth. From the outside, I looked like the family failure, and they never let me forget it. The dismissal started early. During family dinners, the conversation always turned to achievements and acquisitions. Marcus would brag about his latest bonus or luxury purchase, Emma would discuss her high-profile cases and expensive vacations, while I sat quietly, picking at my food. When asked about my work, I'd simply say I was working in tech, which earned eye rolls and condescending smiles. "Sarah's still playing with computers," my mother would say with barely concealed disappointment. "When are you going to get a real job that pays real money?" The financial comparisons were constant and brutal. During holidays, Marcus would arrive in his latest sports car, Emma would showcase her designer handbags, and I'd show up in my 10-year-old Honda Civic. The whispered conversations weren't subtle, they genuinely believed I was struggling financially, maybe even on the verge of asking for money. My father's disappointment was the most crushing. David Chen had built everything from nothing, and he expected his children to surpass his achievements. Marcus and Emma met those expectations, but in his eyes, I was a failure. During one particularly painful Christmas dinner, he actually suggested I move back home to save money on rent. The social events were torture chambers of comparison. Family weddings, anniversary parties, graduations, every gathering became an opportunity for my relatives to showcase their success while simultaneously highlighting my apparent lack thereof. Cousins would ask about my little computer hobby while discussing their own impressive careers and salaries. Aunts would slip me 20s just in case you need it, dear, with pitying smiles that made my skin crawl. The most humiliating incidents happened during family vacations. While everyone else booked expensive resorts and first-class flights, I'd make excuses about being too busy with work or preferring staycations. The truth was, I could have afforded anything they could afford and more, but I was building something bigger. Every dollar I didn't spend on impressing them was going toward my future, toward proving them all wrong in the most spectacular way possible. My extended family had basically written me off as the poor relation. During family events, I'd overhear conversations about my financial situation and how they hoped I'd figure things out eventually. Some relatives even stopped inviting me to events, assuming I couldn't afford the gifts or travel expenses. The isolation was intentional and painful. But the worst part wasn't the condescension or the pity, it was the complete dismissal of my intelligence and capabilities. Because I didn't flaunt wealth, they assumed I wasn't capable of creating it. They saw my quiet nature and modest lifestyle as signs of failure rather than strategic choices. They had no idea that while they were spending money to impress others, I was busy building an empire that would make their achievements look like children's accomplishments. The irony was suffocating. There I sat, year after year, watching them pat themselves on the back for their success while secretly knowing I was already worth more than most of them combined. But I stayed silent, taking mental notes, documenting every slight and dismissal. I told myself it was all fuel for something bigger, something that would make the years of humiliation worthwhile. What they didn't know was that their poor, unsuccessful daughter had already begun plotting the most satisfying revenge in family history. Every condescending comment, every pitying look, every time they made me feel small, I was storing it all up for the day when the tables would turn completely. The foundation was set, years of being underestimated, dismissed, and treated like a charity case by the very people who should have believed in me most. But sometimes the greatest revenge is simply becoming so successful that your presence alone proves everyone wrong. And I was about to give them a masterclass in just how wrong they'd been about me. While my family was busy judging my modest lifestyle, I was quietly building a tech empire they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. It started during my senior year at Berkeley, when I developed a data analytics algorithm for my computer science thesis. What began as an academic project would eventually become the foundation of my fortune. The algorithm I created could predict consumer behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy, particularly in e-commerce and digital marketing. Instead of joining a big tech company like my professors suggested, I decided to commercialize it myself. I incorporated data vision analytics in my tiny studio apartment, using my savings and a small loan to get started. The early days were brutal. I'd work my day job as a software developer to pay the bills, then spend every evening and weekend building my company. While Marcus was posting Instagram stories from expensive restaurants and Emma was showing off her latest designer purchases, I was surviving on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring every spare dollar into my business. My first major breakthrough came 18 months after incorporation. A mid-sized retail chain hired me to optimize their online sales funnel using my algorithm. The results were staggering. Their conversion rates increased by 340% within 3 months. Word spread quickly in the industry, and suddenly I had more clients than I could handle. But I stayed completely under the radar. I operated from my modest apartment, drove my old Honda, and maintained the same humble lifestyle. When family members asked about work, I'd give vague answers about doing some freelance programming. They interpreted my evasiveness as embarrassment about my lack of success, never suspecting I was protecting trade secrets worth millions. The revenue growth was exponential. By the end of year 2, Data Vision Analytics was generating 7 figures annually. I hired a small team of brilliant developers and data scientists, all working remotely to maintain our low overhead. We operated like a secret society of tech ninjas, creating incredible value for clients while remaining virtually invisible in the marketplace. My specialty became helping major corporations optimize their digital strategies using predictive analytics. Fortune 500 companies were paying me 6-figure consulting fees to implement solutions that would increase their revenues by tens of millions. The irony was delicious. While my family worried about my financial stability, I was literally making more money than all of them combined. The breakthrough moment came during year 3 when Netflix approached me about developing a content recommendation system. The project was massive, complex, and potentially worth 8 figures if I delivered. I assembled a team of the best minds in machine learning and spent 6 months creating what would become the most sophisticated recommendation algorithm in the industry. When Netflix implemented our system, their user engagement increased by 67%, and their subscriber retention rate improved dramatically. The success was so significant that they offered to buy my entire company for $47 million. After consulting with my lawyers and financial advisors, I accepted the offer, but structured it as a gradual acquisition over 2 years, allowing me to maintain operational control while securing an enormous payout. The day the first installment hit my bank account, $25 million, I sat in my modest apartment staring at the number on my phone screen. I was officially worth more than my entire family's combined net worth, and they had absolutely no idea. The temptation to tell someone, anyone, was overwhelming, but I had a bigger plan brewing. I used the windfall strategically, investing in other tech startups, real estate, and diversified portfolios. My financial advisor, sworn to absolute secrecy, helped me structure everything for maximum growth and tax efficiency. Within 6 months, my net worth had grown to over $35 million, and the money kept flowing from the ongoing Netflix deal. Living a double life became an art form. I maintained my modest apartment as a front but secretly purchased a stunning penthouse in downtown San Francisco under an LLC. I kept driving my Honda Civic to family events while secretly owning a Tesla Model S that I parked in a private garage across town. My wardrobe remained understated, but my investment portfolio was anything but. The psychological challenge was intense. Watching my family continue to pity and dismiss me while I was secretly wealthier than all of them required incredible self-control. There were moments when I wanted to scream the truth, especially when my father would make those subtle digs about my career choices or when Marcus would lecture me about building real wealth. But the revenge fantasy kept me disciplined. I began documenting everything, every condescending comment, every pitying look, every time they made me feel inferior because of my perceived financial situation. I kept voice memos, screenshots of group chats where they discussed my struggles, and detailed notes about their behavior. This wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore, it was about creating a moment of reckoning that would force them to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. The secret empire was complete. Data-vision analytics had been fully acquired, my investment portfolio was thriving, and my net worth had stabilized at $47 million. I was financially independent for life, but more importantly, I had the ammunition needed for the most satisfying family revenge story ever told. The stage was set for the ultimate revelation. Years of being underestimated had built up to this moment, and soon my family would learn that their poor, unsuccessful daughter had been quietly building wealth beyond their comprehension. The only question remaining was how to reveal the truth in the most spectacular way possible. The incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened at my cousin Jennifer's wedding reception last summer. It was the perfect storm of family condescension, public humiliation, and the kind of cruelty that only relatives can inflict while smiling sweetly. The evening started typically enough. I arrived in my Honda Civic, wearing a nice but unremarkable dress I'd bought online for under $100. Meanwhile, my family rolled up like a parade of success, Marcus in his new Porsche, Emma stepping out of a chauffeur-driven Bentley, and my parents arriving in their latest Mercedes. The contrast was intentional on my part, but it felt different that night. More loaded. More significant. During cocktail hour, the usual financial comparisons began. Cousin after cousin approached me with that particular blend of curiosity and pity that I'd grown to despise. "How's the computer work going, Sarah?" they'd ask, their eyes scanning my modest attire and calculating my apparent net worth. I gave my standard vague responses about staying busy with tech projects. The first major blow came during dinner seating. The family had arranged tables by perceived status, and I found myself relegated to the kids' table with teenagers and unmarried 20-somethings, despite being 28 years old. Marcus and Emma sat at the head table with my parents and other successful family members. The message was clear: until I achieved visible financial success, I remained a child in their eyes. But the real devastation came during the speeches. My Uncle Robert, Jennifer's father and my dad's older brother, decided to give an impromptu toast about family success stories. He went around the room, highlighting achievements. Marcus's recent promotion to managing director, Emma's partnership track at her law firm, various cousins' business ventures and career milestones. Then his eyes landed on me. "Of course, we're still waiting for Sarah to find her way," he announced to the entire reception, his voice carrying that particular tone of public disappointment that makes your skin crawl. Not everyone can be a success story right away. Some people need more time to figure out what they're meant to do with their lives. The room fell uncomfortably silent. 100 pairs of eyes turned toward me, filled with pity, embarrassment, and second-hand shame. I felt my face burning with humiliation as Uncle Robert continued, apparently oblivious to the cruelty of his words. "But that's okay. Every family has someone who needs a little extra help getting started. Sarah's always been good with computers, so I'm sure she'll find something eventually. Maybe one of her more successful cousins can help her make some connections." The laughter that followed was polite but devastating. It wasn't malicious laughter, it was worse. It was the kind of gentle, sympathetic laughter people make when acknowledging someone's limitations while trying to be kind about it. My own family was laughing at my perceived failures while trying to comfort themselves about having a struggling relative. Marcus tried to deflect with a joke about everyone starting somewhere, but the damage was done. Emma looked genuinely uncomfortable, finally seeing how their family dynamic appeared from the outside. My parents sat frozen, caught between defending me and maintaining their own social standing among the extended family. But the worst part came after the speech. As people dispersed back to dancing and celebrating, family members began approaching me with that horrible combination of pity and condescension that I'd endured for years. My Aunt Linda slipped me a business card for her friend's employment agency. Cousin Michael offered to put in a good word at his company if I was interested in administrative work. Great Aunt Margaret actually pressed a $50 bill into my hand for gas money to get home safely. The final straw was my grandmother's intervention. Grandma Rose, the family matriarch who had always been my champion, pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to consider that business isn't for everyone. There's no shame in finding a nice steady job with benefits. I could help you apply to be a secretary at the church, it's honest work, and they treat people well." Standing there, holding a $50 pity payment from my great-aunt while my grandmother suggested I become a church secretary, something inside me finally snapped. These people had spent years diminishing me, dismissing my intelligence, and treating me like a charity case, all while I was secretly more successful than any of them had ever dreamed of being. In that moment, I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to reveal my wealth quietly or privately. I wasn't going to simply prove them wrong with a subtle announcement or casual mention of my success. No, after years of public humiliation, they deserved a public reckoning that would be impossible to ignore or minimize. I excused myself to the bathroom and immediately called my financial advisor. "I want to do something dramatic with some of my money," I told him. "Something visible and undeniable. What are our options for making a statement?" 20 minutes and 3 phone calls later, I had a plan that was so audacious, so perfectly theatrical, that it felt like destiny. I was going to orchestrate the most spectacular wealth reveal in family history, and I was going to do it at the one place where they'd never expect it, the next family gathering. Walking back into that reception, watching my family continue their celebration while completely unaware that they'd just triggered the revenge plan of a lifetime, I felt a calm satisfaction I'd never experienced before. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they understood my place in the family hierarchy. They had no idea that their poor, struggling Sarah was about to become the most unforgettable plot twist of their lives. The breaking point had been reached. The humiliation was complete. And now, the real story was about to begin. After Jennifer's wedding reception humiliation, I spent 3 weeks crafting the most elaborate revenge plan in family history. This wasn't going to be a simple surprise, I'm rich reveal. This was going to be a carefully orchestrated psychological masterpiece that would force my family to confront every assumption they'd made about success, worth, and me. The opportunity presented itself when my mother called with news about a mandatory family meeting. "Your grandfather's estate planning needs to be finalized," she explained, "and we need everyone present to discuss the inheritance distribution." The irony was perfect. They wanted to discuss dividing up wealth while having no idea that the poorest family member was already richer than all of them combined. But here's where it got interesting. Through a series of carefully orchestrated conversations, I discovered that several family members had been quietly discussing whether I should even be included in the inheritance discussions. The reasoning was brutal but predictable. Sarah can't contribute anything meaningful to financial decisions because she doesn't understand money management. My Aunt Linda had actually suggested that my portion of any inheritance should be put in a trust for her own protection, assuming I'd blow it on frivolous purchases or poor investments. Uncle Robert agreed, noting that someone who can't even afford proper clothes for family events probably shouldn't be making major financial decisions. Perfect. They were practically writing the script for their own humiliation. I spent the next 2 weeks setting up what I privately called Operation Helicopter. Yes, I was literally going to arrive at this family meeting via helicopter, but the genius was in the details and timing. This wasn't just about showing up dramatically, it was about creating a moment of cognitive dissonance so severe that it would permanently alter how they viewed reality. First, I contacted a luxury helicopter charter service and arranged for a private aircraft to land in my parents' backyard during the meeting. The pilot, Captain Martinez, was intrigued by my request and agreed to make the arrival as dramatic as possible. We scheduled multiple practice runs to ensure perfect timing and maximum visual impact. Next, I worked with my financial advisor to prepare documentation that would be impossible to dispute. Bank statements, investment portfolios, business sale agreements, tax returns, everything needed to prove that their struggling daughter was worth $47 million. But I didn't just want numbers on paper, I wanted physical proof that would create lasting psychological impact. This is where the plan got beautifully petty. I arranged for a luxury shopping spree that would occur immediately after the helicopter landing. While my family was still processing the aircraft situation, I'd casually purchase items that cost more than most people's annual salaries. A limited edition Hermes bag worth $30,000. A Rolex Submariner. Custom jewelry from Tiffany & Company. Not because I needed these things, but because I wanted to demonstrate that money, the thing they'd always assumed I lacked, was literally no object to me. But the psychological warfare went deeper than material displays. I reached out to Marcus and Emma separately, having seemingly innocent conversations about the upcoming family meeting. During these calls, I planted subtle seeds of doubt about the inheritance discussions. "I've been thinking about Grandpa's legacy," I told Marcus during a coffee meeting. "Do you think the family's approach to wealth distribution really reflects his values? He always said he was proudest of people who built their own success rather than inherited it." With Emma, I was more direct. "I'm curious about the legal implications of excluding family members from estate discussions based on perceived financial capability. Isn't that potentially problematic from an inheritance law perspective?" These conversations served dual purposes. They documented that I'd attempted mature, thoughtful engagement with family financial matters, and they created a paper trail showing that other family members were aware of plans to exclude me. When the truth came out, these interactions would prove that their assumptions about my financial incompetence were not only wrong but legally questionable. The week before the meeting, I escalated the preparation. I hired a documentary crew, yes, a professional film team, to discreetly capture the helicopter arrival and its immediate aftermath. I told them I was creating a personal family video, but really I wanted permanent documentation of the moment my family's worldview collapsed. This footage would become the most satisfying home movie ever created. I also prepared a presentation that I privately called the Sarah Chen success story. It included a timeline of my business development, detailed financial growth charts, client testimonials from Fortune 500 companies, and proof of my $47 million net worth. But I designed it to look casual and understated, as if casually sharing information rather than delivering a crushing blow to their egos. The masterstroke was arranging for character references from people they'd never expect. I contacted CEOs of companies they'd heard of, investment partners whose names appeared in business magazines, and industry leaders who could vouch for my expertise and success. These weren't just references, they were weapons designed to destroy any lingering doubt about my capabilities. 3 days before the meeting, I moved into my secret downtown penthouse full-time, finally abandoning the modest apartment that had served as my cover story for years. I wanted to be living authentically in my real lifestyle when the truth came out. No more pretending to struggle financially, no more hiding my actual living situation. The night before the helicopter arrival, I had one final conversation with Captain Martinez, reviewing every detail of our plan. The aircraft would approach from the east, creating maximum noise and visual drama. He would circle the property once before landing, ensuring that everyone would notice and gather to investigate. The timing was crucial. We needed to arrive at the exact moment when the family was deep in discussions about excluding me from financial decisions. I barely slept that night, not from nervousness but from anticipation. After years of enduring condescension, pity, and dismissal, I was less than 24 hours away from the most satisfying moment of my life. Tomorrow, my family would learn that their assumptions about success, money, and me were not just wrong but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. The stage was set. The documentation was prepared. The helicopter was fueled and ready. My family had spent years underestimating me, and now they were about to pay the price for their assumptions in the most public, undeniable way possible. As I fell asleep in my multi-million-dollar penthouse, I couldn't help but smile thinking about their faces when they realized that their poor Sarah was about to land in their backyard in a private helicopter, carrying proof that she was richer than all of them combined. The revenge was going to be absolutely perfect. What do you think happened when that helicopter actually landed? The anticipation is killing me just thinking about their reactions. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in this situation, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button because the next part is going to blow your mind. The morning of the family meeting, I woke up in my penthouse at 6 a.m., feeling more calm and focused than I had in years. Today was the day everything would change. I spent an hour in meditation, not from nervousness, but to fully appreciate the magnitude of what was about to happen. This was the culmination of years of planning, and I wanted to be completely present for every moment. I dressed carefully in my usual understated style, dark jeans, a simple sweater, and comfortable flats. The beauty of the plan was that I needed to look exactly like the struggling Sarah they expected to see. The contrast with my helicopter arrival would be even more dramatic if I appeared to be the same person they'd been pitying for years. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at my parents' house in Hillsborough, the same location where I'd endured countless family gatherings filled with condescension and pity. Captain Martinez and I had confirmed our timing, helicopter arrival at exactly 2:47 p.m., when the family discussion would be reaching its crescendo about inheritance distribution and my exclusion from financial decisions. I arrived at 1:30 p.m. in my trusty Honda Civic, parking behind Marcus's new Porsche and Emma's BMW. The familiar sight of luxury vehicles in my parents' driveway felt different now, like props in a play where I was about to deliver the most memorable performance of my life. Walking into the house, I was greeted with the usual mixture of polite hellos and subtle disappointment. My mother hugged me with that particular warmth reserved for children you're worried about, while my father gave me his standard nod that said glad you could make it, wish you were more successful. The family had assembled in the formal living room, the same space where I'd endured years of holiday comparisons and career disappointments. Marcus sat confidently in the leather armchair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Emma was perfectly put together in designer everything, checking her phone with the importance of someone managing critical business matters. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the remaining seats, creating an atmosphere of financial gravitas that I was supposedly unqualified to participate in. Uncle Robert had apparently appointed himself the meeting facilitator, which was perfect for my purposes. His condescending attitude would make the upcoming revelation even more satisfying. He began with a lengthy discussion of grandfather's estate, the family's financial legacy, and the importance of responsible wealth management. Before we discuss specific distributions, Uncle Robert announced, glancing meaningfully in my direction, we need to address some practical concerns about financial oversight and decision-making capability within the family. Here it comes, I thought, checking my phone discreetly. 2:35 p.m. 12 minutes until helicopter arrival. Aunt Linda cleared her throat and launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. We've all been discussing Sarah's situation, and while we love her dearly, we're concerned about her ability to manage a significant inheritance responsibly. She spoke about me as if I weren't sitting right there, which was both insulting and perfect for my purposes. Sarah's always been more of a dreamer than a practical person, Uncle Robert added. Her career choices haven't exactly demonstrated financial acumen, and we think it would be in everyone's best interest if her portion of the inheritance was managed through a trust fund. The room murmured agreement. My own family was sitting there, discussing my financial incompetence and need for protection, completely unaware that I was already worth more than their collective inheritance would ever be. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. My father, looking uncomfortable but not disagreeing, added his perspective. Sarah's a good kid, but she's never shown interest in building real wealth. Maybe a structured approach would help her learn financial responsibility. Marcus tried to soften the blow. Look, Sarah, this isn't personal. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. A trust fund would give you steady income without the pressure of managing large amounts of money. 2:42 p.m. 5 minutes. Emma, perhaps sensing the cruelty of the situation, attempted diplomacy. Maybe we should ask Sarah what she thinks about this arrangement. After all, it's her inheritance too. Uncle Robert waved dismissively. With respect to Sarah, this is precisely the kind of decision that requires financial experience to understand properly. We're not being mean, we're being responsible. The family nodded sagely, completely convinced of their wisdom and compassion in protecting their poor, financially incompetent relative from herself. They had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular reversal in family history. 2:45 p.m. 2 minutes. Actually, I said quietly, I'd like to share some thoughts about financial responsibility and wealth management. Uncle Robert smiled patronizingly. Of course, sweetheart. We'd love to hear your perspective, but you have to understand that managing significant assets requires experience with. 2:47 p.m. The sound started as a distant hum, growing rapidly louder and more distinct. It was the unmistakable wop-wop-wop of helicopter rotors, and it was getting closer. The family looked confused, glancing toward the windows as the noise became impossible to ignore. Is that a helicopter? Emma asked, moving toward the window. The sound intensified dramatically as Captain Martinez executed our planned circle around the property. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, everyone could see the sleek aircraft making its approach toward our backyard landing zone. Why is there a helicopter circling our house? My mother asked, looking genuinely alarmed. Uncle Robert stood up, his authority figure demeanor shifting to confusion. This is highly unusual. Maybe there's an emergency somewhere nearby. The helicopter was now directly overhead, the sound deafening and the visual unmistakable. This wasn't passing by, this was preparing to land. On our property. Right now. It's actually landing here, Marcus said, his voice filled with disbelief. In the backyard. Why would a helicopter be landing in our backyard? The family clustered around the windows, watching in fascination as the aircraft touched down perfectly on the lawn, exactly where Captain Martinez and I had practiced. The rotors were still spinning, the noise incredible, the visual drama everything I had hoped for. Who could possibly be arriving by helicopter? Aunt Linda wondered aloud. I stood up calmly, smoothing my simple sweater and checking my phone one final time. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through their confusion, that's my ride. The silence that followed was absolute. 23 family members turned to stare at me with expressions of complete bewilderment. Their poor, struggling Sarah had just claimed ownership of a private helicopter that had landed in their backyard during a meeting about her financial incompetence. The revenge was about to begin. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. 23 family members stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to complete disbelief. The helicopter rotors were still spinning outside, creating a dramatic backdrop for what was about to become the most satisfying moment of my life. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Uncle Robert asked, his voice strained with confusion. I said that's my ride, I repeated calmly, walking toward the window where they could all see the helicopter clearly. I hired it to bring some documents I thought might be relevant to our discussion about financial responsibility. Marcus laughed nervously. Sarah, that's not funny. Whose helicopter is that really? It's a charter helicopter that I hired for the afternoon, I explained matter-of-factly. Captain Martinez is an excellent pilot. I've used his services several times for business meetings in the city. The family exchanged glances that clearly communicated their shared thought. Sarah has finally had a complete mental breakdown. There was no other explanation for their poor relative claiming to regularly charter helicopters for business meetings. My father stepped forward with that particular tone parents use when their adult child is having a crisis. "Sarah, sweetheart, you're scaring us. Why don't you sit down and we can talk about this calmly?" "Actually, Dad, I think everyone should sit down for what I'm about to share." I walked to my purse and pulled out a tablet loaded with the presentation I'd prepared. "Since we're discussing financial responsibility and wealth management, I thought you might be interested in learning about my qualifications in those areas." Emma was staring at the helicopter through the window, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Sarah, a helicopter charter costs thousands of dollars. How could you possibly afford? The helicopter cost $3,500 for the afternoon," I interrupted. "Which represents approximately 0.00074% of my current net worth." Another silence. This one was different, charged with a growing realization that something fundamental about their understanding of reality was about to shift. Uncle Robert attempted to regain control of the situation. "Sarah, I don't know what kind of game this is, but we need to focus on serious family business. This is serious family business," I said, connecting my tablet to their large screen TV. "You've spent the last hour discussing my financial incompetence and need for protective oversight. I thought you should see my actual financial situation before making those decisions." The first slide appeared on the screen: Datavision Analytics, founder and former CEO, Sarah Chen. Below that was a simple statement: company sale price, $47 million. The room went dead silent. Not confused silent, shocked silent. The kind of silence that happens when people's fundamental understanding of reality gets completely shattered. That's not possible," Aunt Linda whispered. I clicked to the next slide: bank statements showing account balances that dwarfed everyone's expectations. Investment portfolios worth tens of millions. Real estate holdings including my downtown penthouse valued at $3.2 million. Tax documents showing annual income that exceeded most people's lifetime earnings. Marcus was staring at the screen with his mouth literally hanging open. "Sarah, is this real? Did you actually sell a company for $47 million? "I did," I confirmed. Datavision Analytics was a data science company I founded in my apartment 3 years ago. Netflix acquired us last year for the algorithm I developed to optimize their recommendation system. Emma, who was still processing the helicopter situation, managed to ask, but you drive a Honda Civic. You live in that tiny apartment. You wear clothes from Target. I drove a Honda Civic because I was being strategic about expenses while building my company. I lived in a modest apartment because I was investing every extra dollar into growth. And I wear understated clothes because I find designer labels pretentious and wasteful. The revelation was hitting them in waves. First the shock of the numbers, then the realization that every assumption they'd made about me was wrong, then the growing understanding of what this meant about their own behavior toward me. My father sat down heavily, looking like he'd been physically hit. "Sarah, if this is true, why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked about my actual work," I replied. "You asked when I was going to get a real job that paid real money. You assumed that because I didn't flaunt wealth like Marcus and Emma, I must not have any. You made decisions about my character and capabilities based on my clothing choices and my car." I clicked to the next slide, a timeline of every major family event where they dismissed, pitied, or condescended to me, with dates and quotes I'd carefully documented over the years. Jennifer's wedding reception, July 15th, I read aloud. Uncle Robert announced to 200 people that the family was still waiting for Sarah to find her way and that not everyone can be a success story right away. His face went pale as I continued. Christmas 2023, Dad suggested I move back home to save money on rent. Easter 2024, Aunt Linda gave me her friend's business card for an employment agency. The shame in the room was palpable. These people were realizing that they'd spent years treating a multimillionaire like a charity case, and they'd done it publicly, repeatedly, and with stunning cruelty. Cousin Michael, who had offered to help me find administrative work just 3 months ago, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sarah, we had no idea. That's exactly the problem, I said. You had no idea, but you made assumptions anyway. You decided that visible wealth was the only indicator of success. You concluded that someone who chose simplicity over ostentation must be struggling financially. Uncle Robert attempted one last grasp at authority, but Sarah, if you've had this kind of money, why let us worry about you? Why not contribute to family investments or contribute to family investments? I laughed, clicking to a slide showing my current investment portfolio. Uncle Robert, my personal portfolio outperforms the family's collective investments by 340%. Why would I take financial advice from people who assumed I was too incompetent to manage money? The helicopter pilot appeared at the back door, carrying a briefcase. I'd arranged for him to deliver the final piece of my presentation at exactly this moment. Excuse me, Ms. Chen, Captain Martinez called out. I have those documents you requested from your attorney. I walked to the door and returned with legal papers that I distributed around the room. These are certified copies of my tax returns, business sale agreements, and current net worth statements. Everything has been verified by independent auditors. You wanted to discuss my financial competence, so let's discuss it. Emma was crying, not from sadness, but from what I recognized as overwhelming shame. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We've been horrible to you. You've been exactly who you are, I replied. People who judge worth by appearances, who assume that success must be displayed to be real, and who treat family members like charity cases when they don't meet your expectations for visible wealth. Marcus stood up, clearly struggling with the magnitude of his misunderstanding. What can we do to make this right? You can't, I said simply. You can't undo years of condescension and pity. You can't take back the public humiliations or the private dismissals. What you can do is learn from this experience and maybe reconsider how you judge people's worth. The room sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of their understanding. Their poor Sarah was not only rich, she was richer than all of them combined, and she'd achieved it through exactly the kind of intelligence and business acumen they'd assumed she lacked. Outside, the helicopter rotors were winding down, but the drama inside was just reaching its peak. My family was realizing that they'd spent years being cruel to someone who had more success than they'd ever dreamed of achieving. The inheritance discussion can proceed as planned, I announced. But perhaps we should reconsider who needs financial oversight and who's qualified to make decisions about wealth management. Uncle Robert looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The man who had spent the afternoon questioning my financial competence was now staring at proof that I was worth more than his lifetime earnings. The revenge was complete, but the reckoning was just beginning. The aftermath of my helicopter revelation unfolded exactly as I'd hoped, but with emotional complexities I hadn't fully anticipated. Watching my family grapple with the complete destruction of their assumptions about me was satisfying, but it also revealed truths about all of us that went deeper than money. In the immediate wake of my presentation, the family meeting devolved into a mixture of apologies, justifications, and stunned silence. Uncle Robert, who had spent years positioning himself as the family's financial authority, couldn't meet my eyes. Aunt Linda kept repeating I had no idea, as if saying it enough times would undo years of condescending behavior. The most genuine reaction came from my grandmother. She approached me with tears in her eyes and said, "Sweetheart, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm ashamed of how we treated you. Success isn't just about money, but the way we judged you was wrong no matter what your bank account looked like." Her words hit harder than anyone else's because they acknowledged both sides of the truth. My financial success was impressive, but their treatment of me would have been wrong regardless of my wealth. Over the following weeks, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Marcus and Emma both reached out with heartfelt apologies and genuine interest in understanding my business journey. Marcus admitted that he'd always felt threatened by my intelligence but had used my modest lifestyle to dismiss that threat. Emma confessed that she'd been so focused on displaying her own success that she'd never considered alternative approaches to building wealth. The most interesting transformation was in my parents. My father, who had spent years disappointed in my apparent lack of ambition, became almost obsessively interested in my business strategies. He wanted to understand every detail of how I'd built data vision analytics, not from pride but from genuine curiosity about an approach to success he'd never considered. My mother's reaction was more complex. She struggled with guilt about her years of worry and subtle pressure for me to find a real job. But she also grappled with a deeper question. If I had been struggling financially, would their concern and offers of help have been appropriate? My success didn't invalidate their caring, even if their assumptions had been wrong. The extended family took longer to process the revelation. Some relatives became awkwardly deferential, suddenly treating me like a celebrity whose favor they needed to curry. Others seemed resentful, as if my secret success had somehow been a trick played on them. A few, like cousin Jennifer, used it as an opportunity for self-reflection about their own values and assumptions. But the most meaningful change was in how I viewed myself and my place in the family. The revenge had been perfectly executed, but it had also forced me to confront my own motivations and choices. I realized that some of my secrecy had been about more than strategic business decisions. I had genuinely enjoyed having power that others didn't recognize. There was something intoxicating about being underestimated while holding all the cards. The helicopter stunt became family legend, but it also sparked deeper conversations about success, judgment, and the assumptions we make about each other. My cousin Michael, who had offered to help me find administrative work, became one of my closest allies after admitting how the experience had made him examine his own prejudices about success and worth. 6 months later, the family inheritance discussions resumed with a dramatically different dynamic. Instead of debating my financial competence, relatives were asking for my investment advice. The irony was delicious. The same people who had worried about my ability to manage money were now hoping I'd manage theirs. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was watching my family develop more nuanced perspectives on success and worth. They began questioning their assumptions about other people, recognizing that their obsession with visible wealth had blinded them to other forms of achievement and value. The helicopter landing had been about more than proving my financial success. It had been about forcing a reckoning with the values that had shaped our family culture. Money became a less central topic of conversation, replaced by genuine interest in each other's actual lives and goals. As for me, I finally moved permanently into my downtown penthouse and bought the Tesla I'd been secretly driving for months. But more importantly, I started living authentically within my family relationships. No more hiding my success, but also no more using their ignorance as a source of secret satisfaction. The revenge had taught all of us valuable lessons about assumptions, judgment, and the difference between success and the display of success. My family learned that their poor daughter had been richer than all of them combined. I learned that proving people wrong, while satisfying, was less fulfilling than building relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Looking back now, I realize the helicopter landing was both the end of one story and the beginning of another. It ended years of being underestimated and dismissed, but it started a new chapter where my family knew who I really was and what I'd accomplished. The relationships that survived and evolved after the revelation became stronger and more authentic than anything we'd had before. The ultimate karma wasn't just that my family learned about my wealth. It was that we all learned about the assumptions and prejudices that had shaped our relationships for years. They got a masterclass in not judging people by appearances, and I got the satisfaction of proving that sometimes the quiet ones are building empires while everyone else is focused on looking successful. Do you think my family deserved the helicopter shock treatment, or should I have revealed my success more gently? Have you ever been underestimated because of how you present yourself to the world? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and proving everyone wrong spectacularly. If this story taught you something about assumptions and family dynamics, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama with satisfying endings. Share this with anyone who's ever been judged for not flaunting their success. sometimes the quietest people have the loudest bank accounts. Thank you for joining me on this wild ride through family drama and financial revenge. Remember, success doesn't always look the way people expect it to, and the most powerful moves are often the ones nobody sees coming. Until next time, keep building your empire quietly. You never know when you might need your own helicopter moment.